of force that you're going to face in the field. If you consider the common working life of a police officer, what type of resistance might he come in contact with during a normal shift? Shout it out. What are we talking about here? When someone stands against the police, what does it look like? Verbal. Okay, good. What else? What is happening in your initial perceptions, right? Just as you are today, when somebody says resistance of the police, what comes to your mind? Physical violence. Like what?
Pushing and shoving.
Pushing and shoving. Where does it happen? What do you think?
Residents?
Residents, very good. Where else?
Traffic stops?
Traffic stops, good, yeah. Anytime there is fear, anytime there is some type of translation of conflict between two human beings, right? Now, because police officers are human beings and not machines, then that interaction includes emotion on both sides. It includes perceptions on both sides. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit today about how we train an officer, how you learn over the course of your career, and provide you with a little bit of insight into the way that we will train you professionally in a criminal justice career over time, and how the expectations start to apply once you take your positions in the field. What are some of the expectations for applying force? Now, it's very incredibly important for you to understand the levels of force that are about to come to you. Now, I talk to you, a lot of you, day to day in our classes, we talk about that power and authority that is about to come to you. And so in this class also, right, in this workshop, we really want to get our heads in the right place before we start talking about some of this terminology. The level of authority that is about to come to you. You will, in the translation of a police officer, be afforded the authority to take somebody's life. You will be afforded the authority to apply pressure to their body, to produce pain, and to utilize that pain towards your advantage. You will be allowed to apply certain weapon systems that will take their vision. Okay? You can apply certain weapon systems that will cause their kidneys to fail. You will, right? You can apply certain weapon systems that will cause them to have an absolute brain malfunction, an absolute distraction utilizing electricity. You will be authorized to really utilize force against somebody. So I really want to understand that term and dance with that term for a while. Force. And what does it look like? What does it actually mean to say that I can apply pain to somebody's body, that I can activate nervous systems in somebody's body and cause them great pain for my benefit, for my advantage? That's force. That's what that term means. That you're going to apply a manipulation to somebody's body. That you're going to do that to gain advantage to the highest degree that you can. That's what I mean when they say that word. Force. It's not about kicking anyone's ass. It really doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't really mean taking somebody's life. It doesn't mean that at all. It's advantage. Force is gaining advantage. That's what that is, the whole point of force policies and authority provided to police and corrections professionals. Advantage. And however much pressure or force it takes to gain advantage. Now that's a really tall order. for you and you might have seen that already, you might have experienced that already, filling out this document. The uncertainty. How many of you felt that? I'm a little bit uncertain about the choice I'm about to make here. I don't exactly know how far I can go. That's the line in the sand with force, is trying to decipher how far I can go before I need to stop. We will give you absolutely all of the tools that you need to make a human body stop. Stop talking, stop fighting, stop running, stop shooting. All of the different types of resistance that might be faced by an officer in all of the different places that he might face it. Okay? And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of some of the deciding factors and the areas where you might utilize this type of force. Different circumstances, we'll talk about that. But that is the real question for you. That is the real lesson in establishing use of force, taking it and training to that in college and then in the field. Is that tiny moment when you're trying to decide how much do I need to gain advantage? It's a $1 million question. And it comes with a lot of different circumstances. Now, some of you have heard me say this in class, but I want you to understand how we train you and how you learn over time. I want you to imagine a great big field of grass. Grass that has not been walked through, a great big hay field of grass. Now, if you walk through that field for the first time and you turn around, you're going to see a little bit of a line through that grass. Right? How many of you have done that, right? You just walk through a fresh field of grass, you turn around, you see where you've been. You've seen the path. That is what happens to you in your brain when you learn something new. When you hear a term that you've never heard before. When you start to understand what that term means, your brain starts to walk through a field of grass. That's all that's happening. It's called a neural passageway. Have you ever heard that term, neural passageway? That's fancy for a field of grass. That's all that means. That your brain has outlined a path from one end of the field to the other. And you have a level of understanding. It's very similar to, some of you have heard me use this example before. It's very similar to when you started driving. Remember when you started driving and no one could talk in the car and you couldn't have the radio on and you couldn't make a left-hand turn and everything was incredibly careful, right? You were walking through the grass. And now you can listen to Led Zeppelin, you can apply mascara, you can eat a taco, you can put taco sauce on a taco, and you can get home without even consciously thinking about how you got home. Is that fair? That's how you learn. You are a creature of habit. That's not a theory. That's a fact. That is how you learn. And when you walk through that field of grass 1,000 times, then it's very easy for you to take that path. You can do it unconsciously. You can point yourself in that direction and walk through that field of grass completely unconsciously. That's how you learn. And so with force, we apply the same concept. We'll take an officer, we'll take a student, and we'll introduce him to a term. We'll say non-lethal weapons system. And when I say that to you, non-lethal weapons system, what am I suggesting to you? What type of weapon system are we talking about here? One that doesn't kill. Probably everything but a pistol. Right? That's what your initial thoughts are. That's that initial level of understanding. But there is an extraordinary amount of science, of training, of learning that goes into that term, non-lethal weapon system. It's speaking about hundreds of different techniques and maneuvers, hundreds of different resources for an officer. It's not as simple as that, but that's your first level of understanding. Now, we'll walk you through college and put you in a training academy and bring you through these weapon systems. And every year, for the rest of your time in criminal justice, in the field of criminal justice, as an operator, you will come back into a classroom and we'll talk to you about it again. We're about to bore the hell out of you for 20 years. That's what's going to happen to you. We're going to bore the hell out of you for 20 years because we're going to say the same thing to you again and again and again. And our hope is that when you're afraid, when it gets real, when the fear comes in and you have extraordinary levels of resistance facing you, that your mind can walk quickly through a field of grass, that you can just respond because that neural passageway in your brain is so solid. It's so solid now. That's what we're trying to do with force. We will teach an officer to draw his weapon 1,000 times, where he will just, okay? Where his binocular vision, when you look at something and you can see that it is a distance away from you, you can gauge that distance. That's called binocular vision. And you can put a sight in front of that, and your mind can collectively put all of those ideas together. That's a pretty elevated concept. It really is for your brain also. And it requires that you do it again and again and again so that when you're afraid, that your mind can walk quickly through the field of grass. That's force. That's what it is. That's all it is training your body according to the lessons that we have already learned, and how you learn, and how you fight, and how your body responds to fear. All of that. That's what use of force really is. And the good news is we're great at it. We are great at it. We have all of these incredible researchers studying that, focusing on that all the time, drawing blood out of a police officer when he's shooting on a range, trying to establish exactly how much adrenaline is spilled into his system at a certain point. They're just researching that all the time to accelerate their abilities to train a person perfectly, to train him to perform exceptionally well when he is terrified. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. What happens to you when you're terrified? I talk a lot about it in my class, actually. Because when you're scared, your body is going to start protecting itself. It will. You are a creature. You're an organic creature, and you have instincts. Your body will take over in many areas of your life where you're completely unconscious of it, and fear is one of those. Okay, let's talk a little bit about it. Some of the things that happen to you. When you get scared, your body will say to itself, okay, you're making really crappy decisions right now. You're going to put us in danger or get us dead. That's what you're doing. So I'm taking over. That's what your body's telling itself when you're afraid. And it will instinctively start to protect you. A couple things will happen to you. Number one, a thing called vasoconstriction will happen to you. Vasoconstriction is exactly what you think it is. It's the constriction of vascular bodies. That's all. What is happening is your body starts to pull blood to the core. Everything that keeps you alive exists in your core. It exists at heart, lungs, right? Kidneys, liver, all of it's here. So it stops caring about this. It doesn't give a damn about that. It doesn't give a damn about that. Okay, your feet, all of it. It starts to care about what keeps you alive and starts to protect itself. That's called vasoconstriction. There's a couple other things that are happening to you. Auditory exclusion is happening to you, which means that you stop hearing incredibly well. Your brain is just saying, I don't give a damn. I don't give a damn about your sight. I don't give a damn about your hearing. I don't give a damn about your feet. I don't care about your fingers. I don't care about any of that. We can lose that. We can't lose this. So it starts focusing hard and fast on your core. That's why they teach an officer loud, repetitive, verbal commands. That's why officers shout, shout, shout. Again, get down, 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 down. Get down. That's why officers do that. Because that's happening to that suspect. He's afraid. And so he tells him again, down, down, down. He's trying to get it in there because that's happening to him. Okay? Now, vascular constriction, it starts to affect your eyesight. It will. You have more blood vessels in your eyes than almost every other part of your body. Did you know that? So when your body gets afraid and it starts pulling that blood to the core, you start losing vision. You do. You start losing vision, dexterity of your fingers. It becomes then very difficult for you to draw a weapon, focus on a sight, pull a trigger. It becomes incredibly difficult for you to do that when you're afraid. Okay? We also know that it's incredibly difficult for a suspect to accurately draw a weapon on an officer when he's afraid. Okay? Now, other things are happening to you that you may not be aware of. Like, let's talk about this. How many of you have ever gotten a wreck and you hurt your leg and you didn't realize it till later? You're like, oh, I cut my leg. I didn't even know it. That's all that's happening to you. Your body's shutting it down a little bit. When you are afraid, when your body goes into that instinct, it will dump certain chemicals into your bloodstream to protect you. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline. It will spill those things into your bloodstream. And when it does that, your heart will start trying to get it around. It will start trying hard to push it to your legs. It will. That's all that's happening. It's an instinct. Okay? Your body's trying to get you that power quickly. That's why when you're afraid, how many of you, when you've been afraid, can feel your heartbeat? That's all that's happening to you. You're afraid. And your body's like, oh crap. Get power out to the masses. Okay? And your heart and your lungs will always seek rhythm. They will always seek rhythm. That's a fact. It's not a theory. Okay? And so if your heart starts beating fast, what happens to your lungs? They speed up. That's called hyperventilating. How many of you ever done that? When you get scared, right? You can't breathe. And when you run, when your body starts working overtime and it needs power, and it's working, right? And what happens to your breath? It's the same thing, okay? Now we have learned that. And so that's how we teach our snipers. We teach our snipers to beat their bodies, to trick their bodies. How many of you have ever had sniper training? Anybody in here? Rock stars, right? We tell them, hey soldier, run over there, run 200 yards to that tower and set up on that tower, and we want you to have perfect shot. So he runs over to that tower and he sets up on that weapon system, and he has to be accurate in his sight, right? But his body is going through this process now. So we teach staff, we teach police, corrections officers, snipers, this thing called rhythmic breathing, tactical breathing. And all it is a trick. We're going to say, okay, I'm going to breathe real slow. I'm going to breathe like you're breathing right now. When you can see you're not afraid, you breathe real slow. Your heart's just pumping real slow, like a rest and digest situation, right? And so we teach a soldier, we teach an officer to start doing that. Just as soon as he starts to perceive a fearful situation, to control that breath in a real rhythmic way, because we know with science that the heart and the lungs will seek rhythm. And if his heart is not fearful, then he won't experience vascular constriction. We can pull ourselves out of that. We can open up our dexterity. We can trick our own bodies into thinking it's not afraid, so that we can fire. We can use our eyes. We can open up our binocular vision. We can utilize our weapon system. We can apply certain joint techniques. We can do things like that, and we elevate our advantage. We teach you this, but the suspect doesn't know it. He's going through all those fearful processes, and then enter Katie, right? And I've got this great training. I understand how my body works, so I can elevate my advantage. And that measurement of advantage and the amount of force that I now need to apply goes down. It starts to balance. So I don't have to use so much force. I have a gross advantage. That's force. That's use of force. That's how we train an officer. And then once they understand those fundamental concepts, we start introducing force options. Okay? We start training him on how to hold a weapon, how to manipulate a joint. All of those force options come in. And different agencies adopt different types of options like that. Not all agencies arm an officer in the same way. Some of them put tasers on him now. They might put taser and OC on him now, and a sidearm, and ask him to choose. Okay, right? It's pretty complicated choices there, and it's based on the level of resistance he's facing. That's force. Okay, that's where we begin today, with those fundamental concepts. Any questions so far? All right, sweet. So what is force? Strength or energy as an attribute of physical action or movement. He is demonstrating some type of force resistance on us, and we use strength or energy in response to that. So who starts the force? They do. They do. That is a very fundamental concept that you have to hold hard to. They initiate the force with their levels of resistance. I am really hoping for an absolutely beautiful day. I am really hoping that I face nothing today. That at the most, I'll have to have a conversation with a suspect or a citizen or an offender. And that's it. When they change that reality and start demonstrating a level of resistance, then I respond with strength or energy. Okay? With the mission of influencing, not deleting, not extinguishing, influencing behavior. That's our goal. It was a really hard concept a lot of times for some of the staff to embrace in my experiences in the prisons. In the prisons, guys, I did over 200 forced cell extractions. I probably have participated in maybe 1,000 use of force scenarios. Just constant. It was constant because I worked in high classifications, right? High custody. And so the people that I worked with, we got accustomed to force. We did it every single day. We were applying force in some translation. Every day. And it was pretty advanced levels of force every day. And so we got accustomed to it. And so there were times when an offender would display a level of resistance, and we were all set to attack, to apply some heavy force, man, because we're so used to it. We didn't tolerate anything. And I got accustomed to that. So it was very difficult sometimes for an officer to accept the fact that we were just going to influence his behavior. We were really hoping that we were only going to do enough to talk him into doing it by himself. We only wanted to use enough force to convince him to be a good boy on his own. Not to absolutely control his behavior, but to influence their behavior. Okay? Another tough concept to hold on to with elevated emotions like that. Okay? All right, so we always will have, guys, two options in force. Always two. One of them is to penetrate, and one of them is to disengage. Always two options here. Now, this seems like a pretty simple idea. When should we disengage? What do you think?
When they've submitted.
Right? When they have agreed, right? They have complied. They are following orders. Now, is there a point where we will just forget about disengaging? We're like, okay, this guy has gone so far now. He's gone too far. He's done too much. We will not disengage. What do you think? Yes. Yes, there is. There are points in that. Very difficult scenarios like that, where we have to apply the absolute extreme levels of force, which is deadly force. There's a real clear outcome to deadly force, isn't there? There's a real clear potential outcome here. There's one of two outcomes here. So at that point, disengaging is very difficult. If we get to that incredibly high, elevated level of resistance, to the point where we make a decision to advance to a deadly force scenario, then the options change for us to influence behavior at this point, right? And it shifts. Deadly force is in itself a advanced topic. It isn't anything you can accomplish in a workshop. It's extraordinary considerations, extraordinary advantages here in authority. And so that disengage concept is very difficult there. Otherwise, it is a matter of ego. Your willingness to disengage a situation when compliance is demonstrated is an ego scenario. It was for me too. I'm in the game with you. It was very difficult when an offender said, hey, I would just like to take you and bend you over that pipe right now. Right? That happened to me all the time. And so for me now to have an opportunity to apply force to that kid, it was very difficult for me to disengage when he was a good boy. If he said, again, Katie, again. What I really wanted to do was to not disengage right now, right? I have an opportunity, and I have an opportunity to take a cheap shot every single time. Every single time. Penetrate and disengage is not a real simple concept like we're either going to enter and back up our officers or, right, we're going to just put the cuffs on. It's a very interesting idea. It's a very mature level of professionalism that I have. And you kind of get it as you go. You really do. I did. You know, I was able to temper my temper as I went forward, as I learned. You know? The big lesson for me was actually doing it. When I first went to work in the prison, guys, I was a kid. I was 21. And I was terrified, right? I was a hayseed. I was talking about it last night. I'd worked at Denny's. You know, I wasn't some badass. I was a Southern Baptist kid. I was from a real conservative family. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I had no concept of what I was doing. And I was very afraid in the beginning because I didn't know exactly what I was doing. And I wondered if I would engage. I wondered if something happens in front of me, am I going to jump in or am I going to take off? I wondered about that. And when it happened, I did engage the situation with my brothers when it happened. But more so because I was afraid of my brothers. There was all that pressure from work, right? I wanted to win at that. I wanted to be a badass. I wanted their respect. And so I did it. But the most important thing that happened to me there was I lived through it. I made it through the whole thing, you know? And I made it through my instant report. I made it through all of it. And I survived. And I went home. And the next couple days later, it happened again. And I had a little bit more confidence, and I survived, and I went home. And so when I say that you will get this over time, the disengaging over time, you really do. Penetrating is easy. He's a bad guy. That's easy. The difficult lesson here is knowing when to disengage. To say, I'm not going to hurt him for the sake of hurting him. I'm not going to hurt him because of what he said to me last Tuesday. Or that he's cussing at me right now. Or that he spit in my face. Let me tell you another story. Once upon a time, in the prisons, I was working at the women's prison. My worst use of force came at the women's prison. I worked at the Supermax and danced with those boys toe-to-toe for years. I never fought anybody like I did at the women's prison. Oh my God, it's terrible. This little chola, little hot girl, right? She's like little teeny little gal, and she had chola tattooed across her forehead. She was kind of a cute little thing, actually, a little teeny thing. And we were in the church, in the chapel at the women's prison, and I was in there, I was working the swing shifts, and my partner was a mountain of a man. He was a great big man. And he was on one side of that church, and I was on the other side, and we were just watching them girls. They were having church, you know, and we'd go in there and monitor them, you know. And so this little gal and her girlfriend were right here. And they get into a little spat, a little quarrel, and they start kind of pushing each other around. So I start screaming at them a little bit. And they start, pretty soon they're in blows, right? They're fighting. And so I reach down and get one of those gals. And she climbs me like a tree. And she was like a cat. She's biting me. She rips my work shirt off. She's pulling my hair out. It was like a banshee. It took all I had to put her on the ground. All I had. And I look over, and I see my partner. He's just throwing girls. Walking through that crowd, tossing girls. And he gets over to me, and I pick that girl up, and that girl looks at him and goes, right into his face. And it starts dripping down his face. And he was like, oh. And I was furious, and he was furious, and he could have snapped her neck. She was a teeny little thing. We could have hurt her bad. So we started talking to each other. Hey Deuce. His name was Deuce-Art. I called him Deuce. Like, hey Deuce, you're all right, man. You're all right. Come on. And it was the worst use of force I ever had. And I've had men try to attack my face, like try to bite into my face. I never fought anybody like that little gal. It was awful. She's all set. She was all set. So those are the moments I'm talking about here on penetrate and disengage. On stepping back from somebody who's like ready to hurt you or cussing you. That's the trick. It's really difficult we can't really train you, right? We can't really train you to do that. We have to let you go. We have to let you go into that environment and walk through some scenarios. But you will. You will. You will handle it. And you'll look around and see mountains of men behind you and seas of blue shirts coming to save you and help you. So fear not, but I want you to recognize that before we go any further, that point. And some of you may have experienced that in your questionnaires. Should I leave or should I stay? How far should I go right now? Okay? All right. So about reaction time. How long does it take me to enter the fight? Okay? Now, when you make decisions like this under fear, you go through kind of this little process here, this reaction time process. The first one is perception. You take a look at it, you show up. Now, a lot of times when you are doing this, guys, if you ask Rich, you ask Rod, we talked about it the other day. I said, hey, boys, how many times have you observed a crime in progress? And they're like, no. Police respond to crime far more than they ever see crime. Does that make sense? And so a lot of times, they are running to a crime, or they have just heard about a crime in progress, live shooter. And they start with that car in that direction, and the whole time they're thinking, live shooter! When that happened to me in the prison, back up, officer down. And I start running through the cell house, right? And my heart and lungs are going like that. And I get to the situation. That's where we are, right here. So my heart rate is probably already elevated, right? I'm already a little bit like on point here. And then we start down our reaction time. We're going to perceive the situation, take it all in. Okay, I see a guy. There's 2 guys here, or there's 4 guys here, or there's 17 guys here. Okay? Maybe you know this person. Like in the prison, I would know that person. I said, okay, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, this little guy. There's all the kinds of other things that come into that perception, like I see a knife. I see a bloody knife. I see a pistol. I see a broken beer bottle. Does that make sense? All of those things are happening in that perception moment. You're taking it all in, and you're basing that on your experience a little bit, right? That's being tempered in your mind by what you have been through a little bit, and what you have seen on TV, Orange is the New Black, whatever, right? You're walking through that a little bit, that perception moment in your mind. The second step is the analysis. Okay, I'm going to evaluate this. How many people do I have? What do I have on my belt? Right? You're starting to put some equal signs together here. Evaluating some options. Next step, you're going to formulate your strategy. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to penetrate or disengage. I'm going to choose that OC over the taser. I'm going to choose my weapon system. Okay? Or I'm going to back out of this and wait for some backup. Formulating that strategy, and then you're initiating some type of action. Now, I'll tell you here, lots of research and measurements go into establishing how long it takes an officer to do that. Why didn't you fire? Why did you fire? Why did you engage? Why didn't you engage? All of those fun-filled questions that we see on CNN and Fox are asking this question a lot of times. What were you thinking? At what point here? Now, a highly trained officer, like we're talking about maybe 10 or 15 years of training, walking through the field of grass, and also experiencing things like that, church, right, walking through fights, things like that, surviving the day, all of that. A highly trained officer like that can go through this in about 0.2 seconds. Bam, they're just on it. They make a decision. Bam! They can put that picture with a choice in 0.2 seconds. A beginning officer at the academy level is walking at about 1.5. 1.5 seconds. Right? And it seems like, God, that's nothing. That's a long time. 1.5 seconds to make a decision. Like, oh! She doesn't have 1.5 seconds. Does that make sense? If I bring the noise. I didn't have 1.5 seconds when that girl started climbing my face. It's on. Right, here we go. So this is pretty interesting because of what it is, right? What we know about it, and that we've been able to kind of capture some measurements, but also that it decreases with your training. It will decrease with your training. You will get better and better and better and better and better. You will. That's not a theory. You are made that way. That's how you roll. Okay? So you will fight like you drive. Okay? You can trust me on this. You must trust me on this. You will fight like you drive. And the more you train, the quicker you get. The better you get. The more you walk through your career, the better and better and better you will get. Okay? But that's the process that you go through. Any questions on that? All right, so let's jump into now the types of things that you face in the field. These are identified types of resistance that are commonly used throughout U.S. corrections and policing environments. This is the standard, the way that they translate resistance into their policy. When I worked for the Department of Corrections, I was their subject matter expert in force for a while. And so I would help them define policies, right? And I would help them to oversee or stand in judgment over force that was applied in the field. I would help them review those scenarios. And so agencies defining the type of resistance to an officer is critically important. Number one, it gives you a little bit of an idea of where you're going to begin, what you're going to face. Remember on that reaction time where it said perception? Your perception of what force is very different right now than it was an hour ago. It's incredibly different right now. So yeah, it's very important for an agency to define in policy and to say to an officer, this is what you might face. Because it will 100% speak to how fast you can react in the field. Okay, so let's walk through some of them. The first one, psychological intimidation. What is it? What is that? What is happening? Psychological intimidation, nonverbal cues, indicating an attitude. What am I talking about here? Examples. Very cool. Yeah. What do I look like if I'm pissed? This? No. No. What does somebody look like when they're pissed? Shout it out. Very good. The face is different. Do I look different when I'm mad than when I'm afraid? What do you think? Do I have a persona? What do you think people in general, when they're aggressive? That's what we're talking about here. Nonverbal cues, psychological intimidation. They're not hurting you. They're not even acting against you. Nonverbal cues, incredibly impactful in the field. Because we have an opportunity here still, right? In force to intercept this before it goes bad. Some of you will go into police work in your agency. I love when agencies do this. They will not put you on the street right away. They'll make you go work in a jail for a while. If that happens to you, accept it with pleasure. Because it will teach you to watch people. What is this guy going to do? Look at him. What are you doing over here? He's standing over here, this guy, right? And you'll be able to pick him out of a crowd. After 15 years in corrections, I cannot eat in a restaurant with my back towards the crowd. I have to have my back against the crowd or against a wall when I'm in a crowd so I can see people because I'm so used to watching cell houses and waiting for something to happen. It's like trained me that way. It makes me incredibly nervous now to have my back towards a crowd. You will also get that way because you'll watch people for triggers like this, potentials. Because you can see it. You can 100% see it when somebody's upset, when they're mad, when they're potentially aggressive. You can trust yourself a little bit in that. I used to work with this cat named De La Rosa. I love saying his name. He was so fun. He's a really funny guy, and I worked in prisons with him. We were still officers then. And we worked in this unit called the Pro Unit. And what they were doing was, at the Supermax, they started putting boys together and tried to teach them how to be together without hurting each other before they went out into other prisons or before they got out. And we worked in that unit together. And I remember one day I was in the control center with him. And we were operating doors and opening doors in the unit. And he was incredibly nervous. I could tell something was wrong with him. And he's like, something is going to happen. Something is going to happen in this unit. The boys were out, all those offenders were out together in the unit playing games and playing basketball and stuff. And he was just concerned. He had a feeling about that unit, and sure enough, about a half hour into that thing, that whole thing exploded. There was a big old fight in there. And he just had an instinct for it because he knew those boys, and he could see them, see their behaviors, and they were just standing there, and the boys were just doing their thing when he said that. I couldn't believe it. He was right. And you're already there. You're adults in contemporary society. You know which line to get in Walmart, right? You can look at people and say, no. Right? You got it. You already got it. Psychological intimidation is easy, okay? Because you can trust your instincts. You've already been very trained in this because you work around crowds all the time, okay? Clenching of fists, tightening of jaws, things like that are really getting close to the fight. When people are displaying that kind of thing, or if they're shaking, how many of you got in a fist fight when you were in high school and you were shaking and you tried to hide it? You're like, all right. That's a fear response. That is a reaction to that vascular constriction. That's all that's happening. Your body will shake a little bit. That's what happened to you. So when you see that, you see a fellow acting like that, it's almost on, right? He's getting worked up, man. And he starts clenching that same thing. There's some physical responses that happen to you. They'll get flushed a little bit. Start breathing a little bit faster, right? They aren't doing anything here, right? So what do we do with this? We're going to talk about that in a minute. Verbal non-compliance. No. Put your hands behind your back. No. Get down. No. Turn around. No. That's all that's happening here. Get out of the patrol, or get out of your car, ma'am. Can you step out of the vehicle? No. So here you are. Am I going to shoot her? Am I going to tase her? Okay. Here you are. No, this is another tricky one. Right? Because we have all of these options available to us at this point, and we have to gauge the level of resistance and make decisions on how we're going to influence that behavior. I'll tell you a way that we did this in the prison, especially in the high maximum security. Those 4-cell entries. What would happen is they would just barricade themselves in the cell. They say, I am not coming out of my cell. I like it here. I am not going to let you see me. And then cover up the windows of their cell. And we had to prove every 8 hours that kid was alive. That's part of the game. And so if we couldn't do that, we had to go in there and get him to make sure he was alive. And so, right, in this scenario, for us to go to the cell and if he said, no, I'm not coming out. Or he said nothing, right? It was still non-compliance. He's not acting out. He's non-compliant. If he said no, a lot of times all I would have to do as a supervisor is bring in an OC can, a canister of OC. I would just have to say, I've got some OC here. I don't want to use it, but I have it, okay? It's the same kind of thing here. We haven't done anything yet. And 9 times out of 10, guys, the good news is 9 times out of 10, that works. This is as far as you get. you get to, nah, right? They're just singing at you, they're cussing you, but they're not hurting you. They're not aggressive. An offender, he could say things like, I want to bend you over that rock. He could tell me that all day long. But if you put any type of hand on me, that was a bad idea, right? And it was up to me to decide what I was going to do with anything else. If I was going to hurt him with anything else, okay? Very important. Very important. Verbal non-compliance. That and psychological intimidation are the tricky ones. Those are the tricky ones in force. Because it challenges us to decide what we're going to do with it. We have to temper our pride right now, right? We have to temper our pride, push it down. Because they aren't hurting anybody. And they aren't hurting us at this point. Okay. Passive resistance. Now they're starting to get a little bit more active here, right? Physical actions that do not prevent the officer's attempt at control. They don't prevent it, but they stand in the way of it. It's pretty interesting little concept here. The greatest example is somebody who barricades themselves, or an offender who just goes limp, dead weight. Happens all the time. Right? Yeah, they're not really acting out. They're not really acting at all. Just dead weight. That's the constant on this. It happens a lot in the field, okay? And it's very similar to someone not getting out of the patrol car. They're not hurting you. They're not hurting themselves. They're not hurting anyone else. They're just not complying with your directives at this point. Again, another area where we have to kind of temper that with our pride and other options that we might have to influence their own behavior. Okay? Defensive resistance. Here we go. Now we're going to start to get on with it, right? Get a little fighting going here. Defensive resistance. Physical actions that attempt to prevent your control. But do not attempt to harm. The comment here is pulling away from you. They pull away from you. They're not attacking you. They're pulling away, but there's motion, there's action behind you. See that? There's action, physical action responses here. Running away is defensive levels of resistance. Okay, running away from you. And the most common is pulling away during cuffing, things like that, pulling away from you when you're conducting searches, things like that. Running away on the street is the most common form here, okay? Physical actions, they again are not trying to harm anybody. They're not trying to harm you. And then active aggression is a physical action of assault. They have transitioned that physical action towards you. Punching, kicking, biting. Assault on you. Now, the line in the sand here is physical action. They're not saying, I am going to take this bat and crush your skull. That's different. That is incredibly different for an officer than a physical action. And we distinguish them very carefully and differently. That's really difficult to do that, isn't it? If he says to you, I am going to, versus no words, let me bring the noise, that is two very different considerations for us in our response to him. Now, in our criminal court, in our criminal code, we do outline things like threats, right? But it's very different right now. Because we're not talking about that. We're talking about your choices in force. An offender could tell me all day long, I am going to bite your face. I'm going to do that. It did not justify me pulling out a weapon system and applying it. Does that make sense? It does not justify that action. It may justify arrest, but we can make an arrest without our firearm. Is that accurate? Does that make sense to you? Okay? There is a very different translation for you between action and threat of action in regards to force. Your force is determined by action. Let me say that again. Your force is determined by action. Okay? All right, let's go ahead. Deadly force assault, this is the extreme, does not require a weapon. I can kill you with this water bottle. I can take a can of OC and beat you to death with it without ever letting any of that OC out of the can. Is that fair? I can take a chair and kill you with the chair. I can poison you, all right? We don't have to constantly be focused as professionals on a firearm. Understand that, and it really is important for you. When you are determining the choices that you make, that you can accurately and efficiently translate deadly force assault. All right? Now, if somebody is hurting someone else, there is a threat of a serious, significant, or ultimate bodily harm of someone else. It's not even you. Do you have authority to apply deadly force? Yes. Okay? What if he says to you, I'm going to kill you? Am I justified right now in applying deadly force? Does that make sense? It's a wild card here. You have to think about the perceptions of action that could possibly happen and that are taking place because we are trying to influence behavior. Their actions, influence their actions. To do that, we have to perceive those actions accurately. The great message for you today here is that a firearm is not the only translation of a deadly force assault. You can be killed with a knife. You can be killed with a chair. You can be killed with a pencil. You can be killed, right? With many different things, in many different ways. So a deadly force assault on your body, a deadly assault on your person or somebody else warrants our shift here into that perspective. Our own shift into that perspective, okay? Questions on this? Good job. All right, so let's transition to force options then. What do we do then? What are our choices? Those are the types of resistance that agencies put forward. This is what you might face in the field. So here is what you do about it. Let's talk about some of these. Officer presence. You just show up. Or 3 of you show up. Or 7 of you show up. Or just a patrol car shows up. How many of you fall for that empty patrol car parked on the side of the road? That's all this is, man. That's all it is. Okay? Because people are influenced by that. Again, we're trying to talk them out of things. We're trying to influence the choices they make and the behaviors that they have. Officer presence is incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful option for you. It's hard to choose this because it's so simple. You want to pull the taser. You want to try it. Me too. Right? But sometimes this is all it takes. And all it takes is for you to show up. All it takes is for you to pull out your handcuffs. That's it. Fight's over. You know? Or all I had to do was draw that OC can out of my belt. Fight's over. It's a hard choice to make when you're amped up, when you're elevated like that, right? Verbal direction. Officers issue calm, non-threatening commands. This is also a trick. You get good at it as you go. I always wish I could see Rich Radabaugh talking to a suspect. I wish I could see him do that, right? How many of you have had Rich in your classes, right? Such a rock star. And he's just the sweetest thing that ever drew breath, right? And I've never seen him mad. Thank God. Because I just don't even want to know what that might look like. He's a great big guy, right? And he's been to the puppet show. So I imagine that is a hurricane when that happens. But he's so sweet, soft-spoken. And I'm sure this is where he got to be that way. 30 years of this. Calm, non-threatening voice. Very difficult to do when somebody is calling you a dirty whore, right? Or whatever. Or spitting on you, or whatever. To bring yourself down to a point of non-threatening behavior, or non-threatening commands. Officers may increase their volume and shorten commands in an attempt to gain compliance. So this is a real interesting training element for officers in all CJ translations, is to recognize that there's an incredible difference between you saying, stop, and you saying, stop! There's a very big difference there, right? That some of you who are parents, you know all about this, right? You know that your kids, right, when you were growing up, you knew when you were in trouble. Because your daddy, right, that voice would change a little bit. Or your mom's voice would change a little bit. It's an incredibly useful tool for you to be able to do that. And when I first started in prisons, my voice didn't really sound like that. It was just years of screaming at offenders that brought me to that crazy, weird voice that I pull out every once in a while, right? And also, I was talking in cell houses, big concrete cell houses, and the noise levels were really high in there. So I'd have to raise up my voice really high. And police officers trying to project their voices, right, across the stores and across those homes and across all of the places that they respond to. So, verbal direction, an incredibly powerful force option, and also very different. You can use it in a multitude of ways there. All right, now it starts to get a little fun. Empty hand control. Empty hand control is exactly what you think it is. Don't ever get lost in the terms. There's nothing in your hand. You don't have a weapon system. You have your hands. That's it. You're utilizing your hands and your weight. That's it. There's no weapon systems here. Incredibly effective. The most commonly used force options in the field are anti-hand control options. Okay? There's two breakdowns commonly that you see in policies coming forward. The first one's soft anti-hand control. This is pressure. 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 Okay? There's no velocity. It's joint manipulation. Do you want to see one? Any volunteers? Okay. I won't hurt you. I promise I won't hurt you. Okay? All right.
All right.
So, now, he has common areas of resistance here. If he's going to act against me, if I'm talking to him here, hey man, what's going on? What happened? If he's going to do an assault, what is the greatest likelihood? Where is it coming from? Hands, fists. Okay? So when we have kind of hand-to-hand here, guys, those are kind of my initial focuses. Right? I'm watching hands. And those of you who take to the streets with your work, you will become incredibly conscious of hands. You hear that in officers, right? Let me see your hands. Let me see those hands. Put your hand in your eye pocket. Hands. I want to see them all the time. Because commonly, that's where it's coming from. So that's what I say, a lot of empty hand control is a common technique in force because of that. And a lot of times it's all that it ever takes. So you have advantages in these hands at certain points. and those points exist in these joints. Okay? We're going to try and minimize his opportunity to do anything here by limiting and attacking joints. But again, we're not having any velocity here, just pressure. Just pressure. And pain comes quickly on your body. Even a healthy young man like this, pain will come very quickly. Now, there are physics involved in this type of thing, right? The way that his body moves, the natural way that it moves, and the unnatural ways that it moves. Okay, and so we've studied that and studied that and studied that in force. And so I would apply, in this scenario, I would just apply a little pressure to this protruding, the high protruding knuckle here. It's just easy. We're going to teach officers how to do things easy, quickly, right? And I would try to then do some isolation here. Now this technique is a common technique that we teach officers, and it's called a transport wrist lock. Anybody heard that term, transport wrist lock? Right? And what I'm going to try and do is limit his opportunity for movement here, and I'm going to bring the pain as quickly as I can. So I'm going to isolate that against my body to try and limit that, and then I'm going to come down with pain. And I want you to tell me when you can feel it.
Okay.
Right? It comes quickly. Thank you, buddy.
All right.
It comes quickly. Very simple techniques there. Okay, now you're in danger in some of that, right? Do you see when I bring him into my body, how I become in danger quickly? He can bite me. He can headbutt me. There's all types of things going on there that I have to train to, that I have to practice. That I'm teaching my body how to move that way 1,000 times. In your academies, you're going to be like, oh my God, I don't want to do it again. I've done it so many damn times. I'm so sick of it. But you can see now how effective it is for you to be able to do that quickly in the field, the moment that you perceive resistance. Okay, go ahead.
How is kind of thing adapted for juvenile offenders?
Oh man, what a great question. She said, how is that adapted to juvenile offenders? In incredible ways. All right, and commonly in juvenile scenarios, guys, let me get another victim. I mean volunteer. No, I'm just kidding. Come on up. In a lot of juvenile settings, guys, there'll be a translation of this type of thing. Okay? So in those scenarios, guys, a lot of times they will just use simple techniques to put offenders into down positions or to just isolate opportunities. So you'll see a lot of rear positions on hands, and I'll have her just come down. Right? If I'm face to face with her, a lot of times, same kind of thing. I'm going to try and just quickly gain an advantage by manipulating the physics of her body, the natural physics of her body. In that scenario, I might bring her quickly to my chest and down. And I take no force, really, to do that. Thank you, sweetie. Actually, here, because you're my volunteer, I'm going to show you guys something so you'll believe me. Okay? So you'll believe me. I want you to go ahead and get down on the ground, just face down on the ground. Put your hands out to your side. To your side. Okay. And I want you to just put your ear flat on the ground. Now I'm going to ask her, all I'm going to do is open up my hand, and I'm going to put it over her ear. And I'm going to say, pick yourself up. In different ages, also the development of a young body and how strong a young man is at certain points of his life, right? Then we can design a force system around that. We can teach you methods like that, tiny little methods to gain quick advantage. But the trick is for us to show you that technique, to make you believe it. You have to believe it. And now she's like, okay, I believe it. Right? You guys can do that even at home. It's don't hurt each other. Don't try and fight it. Those are very simple maneuvers that are safe. I'm not going to hurt a suspect like that. I'm not going to hurt him, right? Even if I get a little crazy and hands up, all I'm going to do is put him on the ground. I'm not going to hurt him. I'm not going to hurt this joint, right? Just very simple levels of pressure here. I have to really go far to hurt him. Okay? So that's a smart way to train an officer, right? So that even when he's amped up, he's not going to cause huge injuries to people because they're losing it too. Sometimes they'll do things they don't mean to do. Right? They'll fall into you and you think they're trying to come at you, right? It happens all the time. Or they'll fall down when you're covering them, or things like that. Okay, so when you train an officer to stay in a mindset like that, teach him techniques, select techniques to teach him that are simplistic like that follow kinesiology, right? That follow physics of the body. If we're owning that as leaders, you guys are going to be leading these agencies. If you own that as leaders and as operators, then you'll always be in a pretty good position with a great majority of resistance that you face. Truly. This is where we commonly see it. In these simple things with these hands. Where we're having to manipulate those hands quickly and put him down quickly. Okay? Hard techniques. Hard techniques is pressure. It's velocity. Now we'll bring in the noise a little bit. A little bit of velocity, okay? Now I want you to believe it. So I want you to hold your hand out like this, right? Hold your hand out, and I want you to just roll up your fist, put your thumb on the outside of your hand, okay? Now, I just want you to hit your hand and stick it. Don't pop it, stick it. Go ahead, now hold your hand out. You feel that? You feel that zing in your hand? Do it again. Hold your hand out. You feel that? You feel those nerves there a little bit? When we utilize a hard technique, we're not just punching somebody. It is ridiculous for you to punch somebody in the head. You know that? Your skull was designed to protect a little piece of mush. Does that make sense? This mushy thing inside your head. You just the perfect design of armor is your head. I have to take something big, hard, and hit this before I can really take you down. Do you know that? It has to be pretty good. You can take some mighty blows here. Do you know that? You really can because it's perfect design. It's not smart. It's not smart fighting. Okay? That's stupid. Don't do that. Don't hit this. That doesn't make any sense. You want to take this out. You want to gain advantage, right? So if somebody's going wham, wham, and hitting you with this great big thing here, why do I want to hit this? I want to take this away. Does that make sense? If the resistance is coming with him running things like this, I want to take this away. I want to make that happen to a shoulder, to a diaphragm, right? To a kidney. I want a kidney to go, oh my God! What just happened? Right? I want a stomach to go, oh my God! What just happened? All the stuff that keeps you alive. Those are targets. Large muscle groups are targets. Kidney, liver, stomach, diaphragm, target. Okay? This is not a target. That's not smart fighting. Okay? So hard techniques attack large muscle groups. They don't pop them. They cause a motor dysfunction, we call it. If you do that hard enough into the human kidney, he will stop. His entire body, like when it's afraid, will stop. How many of you have knocked the wind out of yourself? What happens to you? Do you keep going? No. You don't have any choice now. Your body will reach for life. It will say, I don't care what's thinking here. You're done. You're done. And it will reach for life. when certain targets are shocked like that, those are our targets. Okay, so here, hard, empty hand control. We don't have anything in our hands. We don't need anything in our hands. We don't put pistols in the hands of corrections officers. Why?
So the inmates can take them.
Yeah, inmates will take them and kill you with them. We know these guys are bad. We know. There's no guessing, right? We know that they will hurt us. We've proven that in court. So we don't have guns inside of prisons. We have these inside of prisons. Right? And so we have to teach an officer who's going to stand toe-to-toe with a murdering rapist who's trying to eat their face how to fight with their hands. And that's how we do it. And we do it great. Do it well. It worked for me. It worked for me for 15 years, man, in some sketchy scenarios. Advantage like that worked for me. Joint manipulations worked for me. Takedowns. And shocking of kidneys, shocking of diaphragms, shocking of stomachs. Okay? Right? Let me get a volunteer. Love you. I'm not going to hit you.
I'll do it.
I'm not going to hit you. Come on up. All right, so where do I do it is the question on the table. Where do I hit him? Not here. No. Right? If I need to, I'm not going to mess around. I need to put him down. All right, let's come over here where everybody can kind of see buddy. I need to put him to the ground. There's no messing around now. I'm not going to wrestle him. I want him down. Then there's a couple of areas that I, with a person inside, would target. What makes sense? What is the most dangerous scenario here? Right? There's a couple of large muscle groups that are dangerous scenarios here, right? The arms, the shoulders, these legs are pretty dangerous, right? Right here. But I want to drop him to the ground. So my choices here would be to assault these legs, I'm going to attack these legs and put him on the ground. Or I am going to, right, attack that rear position, right, attack that kidney. If I did that, guys, I'm behind the danger zone of these arms, right? That's pretty smart fighting. Or if I can't, though, if he's got me straight in, maybe he's got a hold of me, then I'm going to try. Your target zone here is just center of the torso, right? You're going to really try to get into that diaphragm with that punch that I just showed you, right? And you're going to try to punch all the way through him. Whenever you punch a human body, you're going to try and penetrate the human body. Okay? You're going to bring all your love. Remember that in Rocky? All your love. And try and drive your hand all the way through that body. That center of mass. You don't even have to worry about target zones, really, those small little target zones. That's why this is, again, not smart fighting. It's little. Why would I want to try? Oh, I'm going to try and find that. No. I want to, man! Center of mass is easy for me to find. It's right in front of me. And inside there's all kinds of fun-filled things that keep him alive. That will shock. The body will reach for life. You can trust it. He will feel like you felt when you got the wind knocked out of you. And his body will reach for life. There's no more fighting. Fight's over. Okay? Thank you, buddy. Good job. I'm not going to hit you. Pretty interesting, right? Okay, let's keep going. Almost done. Almost done. Go ahead.
So I just had a quick question. So if you were behind him, is one of the things you might do is kind of just like kick like the back of his
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's a good question. She said, if I was behind him, would I try to activate some of that joint, right? To take out the things that hold him up? Yes. Yeah. It's a quick recovery for him. If I don't take this out, if I don't make this stop working, all he does is stand back up. Does that make sense? So I can quickly kind of gain advantages like that by activating joints. But there has got to be a follow-up to that. That's just a distraction. We have to follow that with something. All right? Because we're still in the fight unless we take that completely out. Now there's a strike called a common peroneal, right? There's actually, guys, nerve endings that kind of run down here in big muscle groups. And there's a big one that kind of comes in and ties into your butt, right? And that's an attack zone on that thigh, is to try to get that and just send like overwhelming stimulation through those nerves to where that, it will seize that muscle. It works just like your diaphragm does when you lose air, when you knock the wind out of yourself. It seizes it, and it starts to like, overstimulation, and it has to settle down. Your mind has to settle it down, like you're all right, breathe, start over. That will happen in all major muscle groups. Your diaphragm is a muscle, okay? So, yeah, great question. Yeah, there's some of those techniques that you'll learn, but a lot of them are just distractions for a follow-up technique, okay? All right, let's go into less lethal methods, my favorite. These are my favorite. They're so fun. They're so fun. It's kind of sick and twisted. I know, but it's so fun. All right, so officers use less lethal technologies to gain control, of course. All about advantage. These are non-lethal. Non-lethal. Now, when I say that, I say under normal circumstances. Under normal operating circumstances, this would not cause a permanent or significant injury and would not cause death. Under normal circumstances. You can take a taser and beat someone to death with it. You can. But that is not the intended use of that tool. Does that make sense? Okay? So we are talking about the intended and trained use of this weapon system here on these force options. Chemicals, a perfect example of one. Let me talk to you about chemicals. Man, it's so smart. We've come so far with chemical agents. Once upon a time, we used to use this thing called CS, CN. Some of you have been in the military, have experienced that lovely thing. And it was synthetic. What does that mean, synthetic? Very good. It's man-made. It's not organic. Your body fights it. It won't receive it. So it can't cause your body damage. It won't cause damage to, right, tissues. It's not organic. Your body won't receive it. It will fight against it. Okay? That's a synthetic material. CS, CN were commonly used chemical agents when they first came out, and they were all synthetic materials. Now we have moved into the age of organic chemical agent. And when you hear the term OC or pepper spray, that's what it is. Guys, it's an organic material. Now, when it first hits the market, it had what was called an emulsifier in it. An emulsifier is really kind of a projectant, really. And that emulsifier was synthetic. So the great irony when it first came to the market was that even though the OC, the pepper, was organic, the emulsifier was synthetic. That was when it first came out. Now we have progressed in science, and like you guys, when you enter the field, you will use an absolutely organic substance. In fact, OC, it's termed oleoresin capsicum. Oleoresin capsicum. What that means is cayenne pepper and oil. That's what it is. That's all it is. It sticks to you. That really sucks. And cayenne pepper goes into your lungs and your eyes. That's all that's happening. That's enough. And you will just snot all the way to the ground. You will feel like you're dying and choking to death. You will lose vision. Your eyes will slam shut. They will not work for a while. And it will burn. It will take you out. The fight is over. Because your body will reach for life. And it affects your breathing quickly. It makes your body believe that it's dying, that it's suffocating. Okay? But it's incredibly organic. You will be fine in about an hour, like nothing ever happened. Okay? Your body will receive it, and we'll go on with our day. It's incredible. It gains you extraordinary advantage, I'm here to tell you. We use it 1,000 times. All the time. It's very cheap, very reasonable, right? For agencies to buy this, awesome. Okay? Yeah. And then the other common one is the conducted energy device. This is electricity. That's all it is. I'll tell you a story about this. When I first go to work at DOC, they tried to kill me the first week. They tried to kick my ass every day. After we got through the academy, we go to the facility and we do orientation at the facility. And what that meant was, day one, pepper spray. And so at that time, 1997, they stood us all in a line and said, keep your eyes open. And they would just spray you right in the eyes. And you're like, I'm going to die now. I'm done. It was awful. And I was so poor I didn't have air conditioning in my car. So it was like August. So I like hung my head out the window, tried to drive home. Oh God, it was misery. It was awful, but water and air in an hour, that was fine. Okay? Yeah, day two, electricity. And at that time they used this thing called the React belt. And the React belt was a box, an electric box and it had two little prongs, and those prongs went right into your kidneys, and they would strap it to you like a belt. And they would use that, they would put that on people when they took them to court, or when they transported them. Because if they run off, they just push a little button, and it was 8 seconds. So they called it riding the belt. And at that time, they wanted officers to do it. Because if you used it in the field and had to go to court to justify your use of it, they wanted you to be able to show a video that said, I know what it's like. I came out shining, didn't get hurt. And so at that time, right, during training, they would set up a video camera and they would put the belt on you. And here we go. So on my day, I'm up there and it happens. I leave through it, and the person running the video is like, uh-oh. We ran out of tape. We gotta do it again. I was like, what? Yeah, that happens, and damn. And I have like 2 little cigarette burns on my kidney now from where I rode that thing twice like that. But we don't do that anymore, which is good. We don't do that with our officers anymore. But now they have good ones. Now they have the taser. The taser is an extraordinary weapon system. It's getting better every day. So much science into that weapon system. In projectiles, in dry stuns, in the way that it fires up the body and how it works on that current. All of that is continuously studied. It's extraordinary. Okay? It is non-lethal. There's a lot of misconceptions here that, it will cause brain damage. It will cause damage to nerve systems. And the answer to that is, again, under normal operating circumstances, you will be absolutely fine. Entirely non-lethal. If that weapon system is manipulated by an officer, okay, if those amps are raised up right in the field, when they first came out, they were incredibly powerful, incredibly strong. We have learned as we have went along. And now these weapon systems are extraordinary and entirely non-lethal and able to be manipulated, right, in the field. We train to that. Train officers to utilize the weapon systems according to their limitations, right? So yeah. Now, with this, I want to say, less lethal methods, again, can be elevated into deadly force status. They can. They can. All right? Like, for example, our chemical agents. At the Supermax, we had this thing called the ISPRA projecto jet. I loved it. It was pepper spray in this great big can. And I would put it on like Rambo. And I would step in there with this great big canister. And it had this great big lever on it. And it was pepper spray under 1,000 pounds of pressure. And so you could paint a chow hall. You could paint a gymnasium. Right? We would bring it to a single cell and open it in that single cell. If somebody wouldn't come out of that cell, we'd be like, I'm gonna show this to you first. And usually that worked. That was fun. That was officer presence. That's all we needed. Especially after we used it a few times in that prison. And those offenders got to see that. Then once the word got out, things got real quiet in that prison for a while. It was nice. Advantage, right? So these systems, guys, can be elevated. They can be manipulated and elevated. They can be used as torture. They can. Just because they have it on their side doesn't mean they use it right. Right? Do we need to tase somebody when they won't get out of their car on a patrol stop? Do we need to fill their car with OC?
No.
Does that make sense? We have it. We're authorized to use it. It's non-lethal. Right? We still have responsibility. We still have translation to try and balance out our advantage, right? Constantly. So these are super interesting. I'll tell you about, I used to go to security technology meetings, and all the vendors would come in and show us all their good stuff. I loved it. They had this one, now it's waves. They had this great big disc that they brought into one of those meetings. And it was just, I don't want to say ultraviolet waves because I don't think that's right. But they would turn it on, it was just a light. They would turn on this light. And you could feel, it was like heat, pressure, and you couldn't bear it. You couldn't stand to be in the path of it. And it would just put you down to the ground. You would try to get away from it. And it was entirely safe. It was just waves of energy. It was extraordinary. Just for like a chow hall, a rioting chow hall, something like that, right? We turn on the light. Put everyone on the ground, advantage, without injury. That's the goal of all of this, less than lethal systems. And they are awesome. They're extraordinary and getting better all the time. And you guys will train with them. You will. If you go into operational translations, you will train with all those weapon systems. And don't be afraid, because they are not going to spray you in the eyes anymore. They're not going to shock you. They don't do that anymore. We are nicer now. But you will get to use them. In fact, a couple semesters ago, we brought a taser expert to the field, and I'll try and bring her back to show you. She's a subject matter expert, and she brought her tasers in to show you that you hold on to them, activate them, hear the sound, right? That is all coming to a theater near you. You're all going to be able to play with those weapon systems. Super interesting force options here. And then lethal force. Officers use lethal weapons to gain control of a situation. Should only be used if a suspect poses a serious threat to the officer or another individual. Officers use deadly weapons, such as firearms, to stop an individual's actions. Okay, so let's break this down one more step. Should only be used if a suspect poses a serious threat to the officer or another individual. A serious threat. What does that mean?
Like they can kill them.
When is someone a serious threat? What if he's running away from them?
No.
Is he a serious threat? Are you
It
sure?
may be a serious threat to others.
Snap. Say that again, buddy.
It might be a serious threat to others.
Okay? It's not black and white, it's not cut and dry. And a lot of times you'll see stories in the news and you'll look at circumstances, and the way that they are portrayed is super interesting to me commonly because there are missing elements. And now you will wonder about that after this workshop. What is it that I'm not hearing here? What was the threat in the eyes of that officer, in the heart and the mind of that officer, when he decided to draw a weapon system and pull the trigger? Okay? All of those things working simultaneously against and to his consideration of threat. There is a serious threat here. Now, we can't define that, can we? We can't define that ultimately. There's no equal sign. It's not like math. We can't say to an officer, this equals this. We can't say that. Because it changes with people, not machines. It changes all the time. So when we say to an officer, if there's a serious threat to you or to someone else, but we can't define that for him, absolutely, and we have to divert to his perception of the situation, his training, his experience level, his perceptions of the situation. That's very tricky. It's incredibly advanced thinking. And it requires a lot of self-control in the deadly circumstance. Because an officer is equally in a deadly circumstance at that point, right? And you can imagine the level of elevated fear that is happening to his body right now. So this is a really critical scenario here. When you see these stories unfold on the news, this is the time to do it. When you're in college, when you're in training, when you see these stories coming forward and you're able to kind of take some of that in now, it will attract your attention now because you're a CJ major. When you hear those stories on the news, you'll tune into it a little bit. And I really want you to practice this over the course of your college time, thinking about the translation here of a serious threat. What might that officer be perceiving right now? And it's not just a serious threat to him, which is a common misconception, isn't it? They'll say, why did that officer fire on that guy? He wasn't a threat to that officer. The officer had a gun. But that's not the end of the story. It's not just a serious threat to the officer. That officer is charged with this public safety. Serious threat to somebody else. This is a tall order, right? A tall order, it requires extraordinary training. It requires extraordinary commitment, okay? All right, so I want to go a little further here. We've got about 10 more minutes, guys, hang in there. Totality of the circumstances. What does this term mean, the totality of the circumstances? Most agencies are adopting this. Once upon a time, guys, they used to have equal sign force continuums, which meant if you were faced with passive resistance, you use hard empty hand control. There used to be an equal sign in use of force policy across the country. But what they didn't account for was the totality of circumstances, the things that an officer might face. So let's talk about it. Is it fair for us to consider the age of an officer when we're standing in judgment over him, the choices that he made? Is it fair for us to consider his age?
Yeah.
Yes. Is it fair for us to consider his weight? Yes. Is it fair for us to consider his training? What about whether or not he's ever been a soldier?
Yeah.
Yes. What about whether or not he's on the SWAT team? Yes. What about whether or not he's going through a divorce right now? Does that impact him? Yes. What about whether or not it was snowing? Yes. What was the last time he took a class like this? What if it's been 10 years? That's a problem. Some agencies, yeah. Every once in a while now I'll get an expert witness case. I do that a little bit now. That is common. That they'll put an officer behind a weapon and they won't train him for 7 years because there's no money. Okay? So when you hear these stories that come through and you're working through these thoughts in college and getting ready to take position in the field and do good work, you have to consider what you're hearing, what you're seeing. You understand it now at an elevated level. Your expertise is growing. And so our great hope for you is that you will progressively get more and more ready to take the field. And when you get there, that you will recognize that we will account for the totality of circumstances that you face when you make these extraordinary decisions in your life. Okay? Which is a good thing. This was a positive move in use of force that we did this across the country. that they considered the entire scenario, right? So let us look at a little bit of them, right? Look at Ferguson. What do we need to know? Shout it out. What do we need to know? If we have an officer shooting, what do we need to know right now? What was his train of thought? Keep going. What else?
What was the lighting condition?
Very good. What else? What would you love to know?
The suspect have a weapon.
Very good. What else?
Witnesses.
Witnesses, good. What else? Okay. How about how big was the suspect? How old was the suspect? How old are you? When was the last time you had training? What was the training like? Did you fire a weapon in that training? Or did you just go to Cathcart workshop? Does that make sense? Did you just watch a video? What was going on here? And did we get any of that information on CNN? No! Does that make sense to you? You're joining us in this field, and you're about to take up some of these weapon systems. So it is only fair that you understand it at length. At length. And I'm not singing for either side of this argument. I'm not. But I do want you to be aware of this fact before you take positions in the field. Totality of circumstances. That you now are armored with some of that. That you can consider some of these thoughts as you go through the rest of your criminal justice program. As you get ready to take up these systems yourself. That you recognize where you're at. That you recognize what you need. That when you get into those training environments, you're like, yeah, I'm taking all this in. I'm taking all of this in. That you recognize just because I've been a soldier doesn't mean I'm an expert in chemical agent. Right? Just because I have fired an assault rifle doesn't mean I am, right, a react belt expert. Like all of that, just humbling yourself. Me too, all the time, humbling myself. What is it that I don't know today? Whenever I used to do those use of force reviews, guys, I hated it. I hated that part myself. I did. Because I would have to stand in hard judgment over my brothers or my sisters, just look at what the choices they made were. There are a lot of things missing from an incident report. When you look at an incident report in the field, it will say when, where, how, why, right? At 5 o'clock in the morning, at Grand and 5th, right? Here was the suspect. Here's what he looked like. Here's what I look like. Here's the weapon system. But there's a lot of things missing from that incident report. And so I would always try to open my mind to the totality of circumstances. How are you doing? Did you work a double? Does that make a difference? Yes. Okay. All of those things. Totality of circumstances. Incredibly important for you to consider that. So I want you to just think about where you're at right now. How much training you might have had till now, right? Where, what your thought process is kind of like going into the game. Some of you have been in some high pressure circumstances, right? And you've had to walk through some things like that. Some of you have not at all. I worked my way from hayseed to subject matter expert in the field. Okay, I did that. You're going to be fine. You're going to be totally fine. I didn't know what the hell I was doing when I got there. And I made it. I worked my way up to it. I used all of those weapon systems and did fine. Okay? You're going to be all right to do this, actually. You really are. You're going to be all fine with it. It's important for you to humble yourself to my totality of circumstances, and always with a focus on improving. Always with a focus of improving your ability with a weapon. Always with a focus of improving your ability to be a great talker instead of a great fighter. Right? Okay, questions so far? We're almost done. You get a little tired. All right, so here's some more variables, right? Size and gender, access to weapon systems, a big one. What do you got on your belt? What did you, they said Katie Cathcart beat an offender to death with a chair. great big, like, he had that bench press record in the DOC. He was a beast. He was a murdering rapist. He was a lethal little creature, man. And he was really just doing us a favor staying, because he could just rip those doors right off. Like, he was that strong. He was a beast. And he was in my unit. I got along with him pretty good. I'm an easy keeper. I can get along with people pretty good. And he was, I didn't have any problems with him. We just did our thing, day to day. But I knew he was there. And one day I was pushing a chow cart through the cell house, because we would feed him door to door. It's a 23-hour lockdown facility. And somebody was in the control center, and I get in front of his door, and his door goes, and I look over. I look at him, and I'm standing face to face with him. And he's just grinning at me. And so I just back up my chow cart. right in front of his door, and he starts laughing in there. He wasn't going to hurt me, but he could hurt me. He could snap my neck. He could snap my neck right now. I had no chance. And I wasn't going to make it down the stairs. How was that? It was sink or swim, man. I was going to try. If I knew he had a dumb knee, I was going to go for it. Like, that was my choice, man. So sometimes it is a sandwich. Okay, yeah. Right? Those police officers are going out into the world, man. Into Walmart, into Chili's. Right? Into UCC, that's it. Going into all kinds of places, under all kinds of circumstances. And so we evaluate your choices here based on that. And that's a good thing. We don't know. We don't know what you're going to face. That's a positive move towards policy. All right. So here's how the options framework. It used to be an equal sign, and now it's like a wheel. We spin the wheel. What are you going to face today? And we spin that resistance against those force options, and we allow you to make the choice. Based on what you're facing, we train you to all these options, and then we spin that wheel when you are faced with resistance and allow you to make a choice for yourself. The other thing is sometimes the choice goes from talking to shooting, doesn't it? Yeah. Sometimes it's not, well, then he punched me, then he called me a jerk, then he hit me, then he... No. Sometimes it's like, he called me a jerk, and then he tried to choke me. Okay. And it goes from one to the other very quickly. It also goes the opposite way very quickly. Right? Maybe he's a tweaker. And 1 second he's trying to bite me in the head, and the next second he's crying. Okay? Happens all the time. So this wheel is a very incredibly important element of use of force policy, and that allows you, it transitions the choice and the burden to the option. Okay? It gives him what he needs to save himself, but it also increases the judgment, doesn't it? It really increases the judgment. But we want officers who are alive first. We'll deal with judgment, right? We want you alive first. All right, so that is the end of my presentation.